Welcome back to Relationscapes. This is the podcast where we explore unfamiliar life landscapes and hopefully start to feel more at home here than we ever expected. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode is author Chelsey Goodan.
Lots of times it's actually just her trying to explore her own expression of her identity and who she is in the world, and she needs some space to do that without judgment. And when you do put that fear-based judgment on her, that's when they close off and shut down. And, there's so many reports, CDC report came out of just how anxious and depressed girls are, and has a lot to do with them not feeling understood.
Chelsey Goodan says that for too long, teenage girls have been undervalued and overlooked. Having been a longtime tutor and mentor to hundreds of girls from many different backgrounds, Chelsey realized why so many of them were anxious and hurting. People often treat teenage girls as problems to be solved, which is why Chelsey decided to write the book Underestimated: The Wisdom and Power of Teenage Girls. Instead of seeing teens as a problem, Chelsey invites us to realize how many solutions they have to offer on all kinds of things like perfectionism, friendship, identity, shame, power, and much more. This is a must-read for anybody who has teenage girls in their life. And Chelsey Goodan joins us to talk about it right now on Relationscapes. Chelsey Goodan, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So you've been working as an academic tutor and a mentor for 16 years, and this has really given you an up-close and personal experience with teenage girls from all kinds of backgrounds. Like Brianna, for example. This is someone that we meet in the book. Did I say that right? Is it Brianna?
Yeah, Brianna.
Okay, Brianna. So she's a 13-year-old. You say that she was having a hard time getting to her first period class because she was sleeping in, right? So her parents and teachers couldn't figure out how to get her there on time, but you figured it out. And we'll talk about how you did that maybe later on. But Brianna's mom was amazed, and like a lot of parents that you've known, she praised you as the teenage girl whisperer. And that's a description that you rejected right away. So I wanted to start with that, about the idea of being a teenage girl whisperer and why you say, actually, no.
Oh, I love that. I am not the teenage girl whisperer because I'm not trying to quiet them in any way. I'm actually trying to give them a voice. They are not a wild horse that needs to be subdued and contained and controlled. They need a voice to share their needs, their wants, their perspective. And so by no means am I quieting them.
Right. And you talk about in the book how this idea of girls as like a wild horse, I mean, that's not an uncommon thought. Like a lot of parents dismiss teenage girls as being like crazy or hormonal or dramatic. And everyone's probably heard a parent say they're relieved to have a boy because teenage girls just are out of control. So maybe say a little bit more about these common attitudes as you've encountered them.
Yeah, the book is about subverting that idea, this stereotype, and it's a harmful stereotypes, these ideas, these labels we put on girls, because they just feel criticized, they judged. I would say in general, girls feel so judged, and what that does is, again, silence them. It makes them shut you out, close off, disconnect from their own voice and authenticity. And, why are we saying these things like mean, hormonal? It's actually more about your own issues and not about actually meeting the girl where she's at and understanding what she's going through with empathy and care. And, lots of times those triggers that we have inside of us when we're kind of like annoyed with the teenage girl, it's actually your story. It's your own inner teenager being triggered and you're projecting your story onto her. And lots of times a girl's just like, that's not my thing. Just will you listen to me and what I'm going through right now?
Yeah, and it's not to say that teenage girls don't have a lot of passions or can be hard to parent. It can be hard to relate with, right?
Well, so I'm fine like saying they have big feelings, right?
Yeah.
But I love reframing big feelings and that actually their big feelings are quite wise because all human beings have big feelings. We just as adults learn how to contain and squash and repress and shove them deep down inside of us until someday they explode in therapy many years later, right? And I would actually say that teenage girls are connected to their feelings, and what happens is when they're not heard and understood and listened to, that can be a little more chaotic. But I have found that when you just hold space for a girl's feelings and you just are like, yeah, that sucks. That sounds hard. I understand why you feel that way. There's an immediate calm and gratitude. They're usually like, oh, thanks for listening. No one understood me. And all I had to do was just listen to her feelings. I didn't need to fix them. I didn't need to give her my advice or my solution or slap positivity onto it.
I like how you also talked about for the parents or for caregivers or teachers or whatever, a lot of times they're interacting from a place of fear. And there's a lot of fear-based control that parents and others try to exercise. Maybe give an example of what that sort of fear-based control looks like when it comes to teenage girls.
Oh my goodness, it shows up in so many ways. It could be with what she's wearing, with social media, with is she doing well enough in school and like checking up on, kind of the helicopter parenting of it all. We keep thinking that if we just protect every choice of hers, then she'll be okay, or just constant, quote unquote, teaching her what's best rather than empowering her to find her own solutions. And this fear, let's take her outfits, that you project fear onto it. And lots of times it's actually just her trying to explore her own expression of her identity and who she is in the world. And she needs some space to do that without judgment. And when you do put that kind of fear-based judgment on her, that's when they close off and shut down. And, there's so many reports, CDC report came out of just how anxious and depressed girls are, and has a lot to do with them not feeling understood.
When you see those studies, do they make sense to you? Like there's studies that talk a lot about anxiety right now, especially coming out of the pandemic. There's talk of like an epidemic of anxiety. And from your vantage point, you've been thinking about these things for years. And so...
Oh, yeah. I was not surprised at all by the report. So, yeah, I mean, girls are really grappling with anxiety, and it has a lot to do with perfection and pressure, the pressures and expectations for them to be perfect and also to be pleasing to everyone. They're constantly taught to put on a show. It's performative kind of state of being of like, everything's fine, right? You hear them say, I'm fine. And that's not true. Every human being is going through some struggle. No one is perfect. Perfection doesn't exist. And so the more I permission that space to a girl to feel still whole, even in the imperfection of her humanity, that's where I see a lot of that anxiety reduce. And she's just like, oh, okay, well, perfect doesn't exist anyway, so I can just be me.
Right. And I want to get back to the perfectionism in a minute, but let's talk about kind of the attitude that you're inviting parents to cultivate, because your book isn't just a list of like do's and don'ts. You're actually trying to change mindsets, because if we can change mindsets, then our actions will flow from that. Then we don't have to remember and try to remember, oh, if they do this, then it's not a flow chart. If they do this, then I'll say this, right? The phrase you use is trusting curiosity. So let's go back to Brianna, who we mentioned earlier, and talk about how approaching her situation of being chronically late for school and how your approach of trusting curiosity could make a difference for her.
Yeah. And genuine curiosity, no secret agenda. So I say phrase everything as a question with that genuine curiosity where you're just like, I asked her, I was like, do you want to be at school on time? Like, do you want that? Let's just start there. Yeah. And she was like, yeah, I do. I'm like, okay. So, why aren't you then? And I just keep asking questions. And she's always like, she knows that I'm putting all the true source of answers and responsibility on her because I respect her. It's actually a sign of respect for her to develop her own solutions and thoughts about things and her own choices. When she makes her own choice, then it's going to stick. So I was like, well, is there anything else that could wake you up? Like she hated her mom waking her up. It would just create this fight every morning. And they kept taking away her phone, which had her alarm clock on it, right?
Consequences,
Yeah. And I was just like, okay, well, is there anything else in the world that could wake you up? I'm not about to just jump in and tell her. She kind of looks at me. And so, eventually she's like, well, we could get an alarm clock. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what an idea, right? But it's playful. There's levity to it. It's not me trying to judge her, and control her. And then, I'm like, why haven't you used an alarm clock, right? More curiosity.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I just hate all the buttons. I always get confused. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like, let's pull up the internet with options, right? And have you pick it out yourself, right? And so she did. She picked out the one that works for her. And of course, that ended up working, right? You give her a sense of agency in these situations.
Right. And here's where it gets hard is what if Brianna had said like, I don't really care, or didn't want to come up with a solution, or came up with with a solution that you didn't think would work, because you say sometimes when they're even making wrong choices, there's a particular way that can be approached.
Yes. Gosh, your questions are so good. Yeah,
They're from your book, so.
I actually believe that even if she's not making a choice that you are in full agreement with, there's more benefits to just holding space for that and letting her make the choice. Because if it doesn't end up working out, it's her mistake to learn. I have learned when girls make the choice, then they actually kind of feel the pain of the mistake and are like, oh, that wasn't the best choice, right? Whereas if we keep buffering and padding their not so great choices, they're never going to learn. And I have plenty of girls in college who had very helicoptering parents who buffered all their choices. And then when they were in college, they kind of went reckless, right?
Yeah.
And they've actually shared with me, like, I kind of wish I understood cause and effect better in high school and had a little more safety to make not the greatest choices.
Yeah.
And it was quite wise of her to share that, what her needs might have been, because we're all human beings and learning. And that middle ground space where there's discomfort, the discomfort of maybe watching a kid not make the best choice, is a growth space. It is where they learn. But again, we always look at these binaries of black and white and think there is a perfect choice and there's a terrible choice and there's no in between. And that is a really gripping kind of fear-based mentality. And I talk about, the gray zone between the black and white. It's not a term I came up with, but it is a term that has helped me very much in this space with meeting girls where they're at and helping them grow and learn in their own way.
See, I appreciated this so much about the book, because one of my fears going into it was that your book would sort of pedestalize teen girls. I mean, it's saying, like, let's listen to teen girls, the wisdom and power of teenage girls. It's called Underestimated. So you're pointing out that girls are underestimated, which I agreed with. But I was also like, but they're also kids. Like, they're also trying to figure things out. You use this phrase, LOVE, this acronym, let others voluntarily evolve. And that recognizes that sometimes they're going to get stuff wrong. The girls aren't perfect and that they're learning, that they're humans. Talk about the attitude of let others voluntarily evolve and how that is different from permissiveness without any rules or any sort of like engagement, right? Because let others voluntarily evolve could just be like, don't care at all. Go ahead and do whatever you want, kids. But you're suggesting something a little bit different by let others voluntarily evolve.
Yeah. Well, and it's an act of love to offer someone the dignity of their own choices. When we try to control someone's choices, by the way, it usually doesn't work anyway. Again, they shut you out. They don't like you. And so it's really about this idea of that it is a loving choice to empower someone in their own choices. And by doing that, it's not just like letting them do whatever they want. It's a conversation. It's a conversation with respect that instead of when you have control, there's a lot of like, I am the person in power and you are not, and you will do what I say because I know what's best. And this is where we're underestimating the girls. I have seen incredible solutions come out of the girls when they're given the space and time to think about it, right? And a lot of times when I tell a parent that I ask a girl, well, what do you think the solution is? The parent will be like, well, she just says, I don't know. I'm like, okay, you know what? She can say I don't know because she hasn't been given a lot of space to think about it,
Or maybe she's given answers and got shut down. So she's like, I'm not even going to volunteer anything because I'm going to get shut down.
Exactly. So I'm always like, okay, you say I don't know. Great. Well, let me think about it. I'll come back to you in like 2 weeks. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it, what smart thoughts you come up with. Like, show that you believe in her, that you trust her to come up with smart thoughts. And my experience has been the girls rise to the occasion and do develop really smart thoughts and solutions.
All right. Well, let's talk about feelings. This is a chapter in your book where you bring up the term holding space. And that's a term that I don't remember hearing that term a lot growing up, but I hear it a lot now. I hear it on social media. I hear friends talking about it, especially when people are grieving or whatever. And holding space is something you describe in your feelings chapter. So talk about what you mean by holding space for somebody.
Yeah. So again, so often when we see someone experiencing painful feelings, right, like disappointment, anger, frustration, sadness, we want them out of that pain. So we try to help them right away. We give our solutions, we fix, we give positivity, like here's a different way to look at it. And what I have found, and psychology research very much supports, is people really just need you to hold space, which means just listen to the feelings and reflect. You can reflect it back by using their exact words. Like, that does sound frustrating. That does sound annoying. I'm sorry to hear you're going through that. That sucks, and that's it. And just validate their experience, because otherwise it's really crazy making. You're like, wait, am I bad? And the girls absorb it as I am bad for feeling this. And there's not space for them to feel these uncomfortable feelings. Instead, they just feel bad, which again leads to worse outcomes in terms of their mental health. So when you hold space, it takes patience and ability to withstand discomfort. But by a girl expressing her full humanity, including displeasing feelings, it's really healing. And also on top of it, they found that just naming the feeling is very healing. That's why I put a feelings wheel in the back of the book. And I often get it out, and I'm like, because lots of times our vocabulary is limited, and they're like, I feel bad, I feel sad.
Right.
And then the feelings wheel spans out into more descriptive words. And when you hit a word, like I've noticed disappointment is one that disappointment is way more powerful than people give it credit for. And when you name it, you're like, oh, okay, like that's what I'm feeling. And then you feel it more and it processes through you. And they, the research is showing how it can take just simply 90 seconds to actually let a feeling pass through you.
I love
when
that.
You squash it down and stuff it inside of you, that's where more harm is created.
Yeah, I loved when you brought that research into it to talk about the chemical situation, the physiological experience of an emotion, and how studies have shown it lasts about 90 seconds. That doesn't mean that a feeling stops at that point, but this initial rush that's overwhelming, that clouds all thinking, that just sort of takes up all your mental space, if you just let that be what it is for 90 seconds or so, then and you can start to then process it, start to think through it. And I like that. I really like the feeling wheel. We've worked on this a lot with my kids, is to help them develop a vocabulary of feelings, this idea of emotional intelligence, and have really benefited from this.
And certainly with boys, like I have worked with boys too, and I found it really helpful. Lots of times when I'd work with a boy, I'm like, well, how are you feeling? They look at me like no one has ever asked them that, right? And same thing, like when they expand their vocabulary, it really helps.
And with holding space too, I like the word holding because it means you're still connected, but you're not hovering. You're just there, like holding space. I don't know. It somehow hits this really good in-between space of not just like clutching someone so they can't move, but also not just like letting them go so they're totally on their own. Like holding space is intimate, but it also gives space for people to be who they are.
Yeah, totally. And then there is oftentimes, once you develop trust and respect, you can say, well, do you want my thoughts on this? Just ask, phrase it as a question. And she may say no, and she may say, sure. It's to go with that, let her lead her own healing, right? That's the let others voluntarily evolve.
Yeah.
It's a loving act to let her find it for herself.
I liked your metaphor of the punk rock band versus the muffled flute. You kind of ask parents or other folks to picture themselves as being at a concert, and like you're there as an audience member, as a supporter, you're enjoying this music, and you want to let them vibe what they're vibing and be receptive and be part of that, rather than shutting down the show or criticizing it. Like, I like this metaphor a lot.
Yeah, so the punk rock, it's kind of like you need someone to jam out to your punk rock band of feelings, right? And just want to be like, yeah, totally, right? Whereas you're trying to play your music and someone's like, turn it off. It's too loud.
Yeah, or like, I'm scared of that. Like, whoa. Like, I think, again, fear
back
comes.
to the fear of feelings, right? Everyone's scared of teenage girls' big feelings.
Yeah. That's Chelsey Goodan. We're talking about the book Underestimated, The Wisdom and Power of Teenage Girls. And Chelsey's also a mentorship director at Democracy. That's a nonprofit that guides girls from underrepresented communities into leadership positions. Chelsey, let's talk about the parts of the book that focus on sex and sexuality. I think this is a really important part of the book here. You say that sex and sexuality are where the most alarming, toxic, and gripping fears are found. And sex education in schools is failing. A lot of parents are floundering. Kids maybe don't feel comfortable talking to adults about this stuff. So when you've been in girls' confidence, as really just side by side with them, what are they bringing up about sex and sexuality?
Yeah, it has so much to do with shame and blame. Like there's just no space for them to explore any healthy exploration. They just can't get it right. They're either too much, too little. And so much of the narrative placed on them is about protecting them from boys, basically. And it's really messed up because why are we putting all the blame and responsibility on a girl and not focusing on boys? Boys are very capable of being responsible and controlling their inclinations, but we don't talk about that. Instead, 90% of the conversation is on what she's wearing. And I see it happen again and again in all types of communities. And, to to talk about sex education in school, only 11 states require that consent be taught in their sex education curriculum. So we are failing boys too. They're feeling lost also on this conversation. It explains a lot of the sexual violence that we see. And girls feel like they're going crazy. They're like, why is no one talking about this? Like, this is a male violence issue, not a me being too sexy issue, right? And, it's hard for a girl to find herself within that because honestly, it is an age-appropriate time for her to be figuring out who she is in that space. As much as parents want to shut that down, it's pretty normal for a girl to be exploring her identity that way. So, girls talk to me a lot about just, the control, blame, and shame they feel and how they wish it wasn't so. I guess that's mainly like they just feel judged in every choice that they make is going to be judged. And so a lot of it has to do with, again, that curiosity where I'd meet her where she's at. You can't come hard and fast into this conversation with your kid. And so I've recommended in there, you could bring up that consent statistic, like to approach it intellectually with a girl. Like I actually think bringing up, I talk to girls about sexual assault on college campuses and they really appreciate that I'm respecting their intellect on this issue and that I care about it and that I'm on their team.
So you like bring up a news story or something and like say, hey,
yeah,
did
exactly.
you see this?
I'm like, hey, what do you think about that? Do you think that's an issue? Or what do you think about your sex education curriculum at school? Do you think it's doing a good job or not? Like kind of more intellectual perspective. And that kind of gets them to start trusting that you're on their team about this in general, because they feel like no one's on their team about it and that they're just going to be judged.
You also say there's issues that they don't see being brought up at all, which is troubling. For example, harassment. Like they don't see good conversations happening. They see it amongst peers. Like they might see it on TikTok or they might see people talking about it on Instagram or other places. What they're not seeing it is from the quote unquote responsible adults who are supposed to be teaching them about sex and about interacting with other people. And you mentioned consent already, but harassment was another one. And another one you mentioned is double standards. So maybe talk about
oh my gosh,
those
they go
issues.
on and on about gender double standards with me, like how much the boys get to run free in terms of like, they feel affirmed when they're like exploring their sexual identity. And it's like, oh, hey, dude, he's doing great out there. There's a male masculinity culture that really affirms men and boys for pursuing women and being a player, right? And there's nothing positive for a girl in that space. She's slut shamed. And so girls bring over and over with me about how they're slut shamed within so many different contexts. And yeah, the harassment too of just like grown men looking at their chests, and it's like, oh, shrug your shoulders. That's the way men are, or boys will be boys. No, we are capable of change and growth in this space. And that is why I'm trying to put the conversation, focus it on that. Like one of the girls in the book goes like, go talk to your boys. Stop making this my problem.
And it's not just about the boys, too. So this is another thing your book points out is like a lot of it focuses on that, but not every girl's even worried about boys to begin with. There are queer kids. There are asexual kids. So this is another thing that you've learned from girls. What have you learned from girls on sexuality issues?
Without a doubt, Gen Z identifies way more on the spectrum of sexuality. And so many girls are not tying their sexuality to any identification with a boy's attention, boy's interest. And it's much more expansive now. So I think that's part of the shift too, where they're just like, this is, one of the girls talks about the fairy tale being over and like how now it's just all, them trying to deal with the societal narrative and find their own individuality within that. And so the more that I can permission, lots of times when I say to a girl, I'm like, if we do talk about romantic interests, I'll just be like, well, do you have a crush on anyone? What they hear a lot is like, do you have a boyfriend?
Yeah.
Do you like a boy? And they're just so over it. They're just like, you know what? Maybe that's not my whole identity and worth is whether I have a boyfriend.
You also say they're really good at detecting covert agendas. So if like a parent's coming to it with the idea of like, I need to stop a girl from getting pregnant, like this is my number one goal here, they're going to sniff that out like immediately. And it's probably not even going to seem all that relevant.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, the girls love, first of all, radical honesty, and they would prefer you to just cut through and actually say the truth. So in general, I always recommend if you're feeling your own insecurity about bringing something up, they're going to sniff it out, right? And so one of the biggest pieces of advice of the sexuality chapter is go deal with your own sexuality baggage, because that's also going to be handed down to the girl. She's going to feel it. You're going to pass down the same wounds that you experienced. And, the only thing truly in our control is our own healing. And lots of times the girl's just like, that's not my story. You know how I said before.
Yeah.
And so the more you can be honest, like, hey, I actually struggled with this, or, this was a thing for me, but is it for you? And just again, phrase it like a question with curiosity.
So you talk about introducing ideas like consent, you mentioned earlier, that this needs to be a bigger focus in curriculums and in how parents and other trusted adults talk to kids. You talk about respect as something that's really important. Another one, it's perhaps the most tricky one, is pleasure. And this is one that perhaps more conservative people don't want to talk about because sex is for having babies, and we don't want to talk about pleasure because then it might become selfish, etc. And more progressive people might shy away from it because they just feel uncomfortable about it, or they're not sure how to talk about it. So, but then what that means is a lot of young girls especially are growing up without a sense of pleasure being an important part of what it means to be a sexual person.
I so appreciate you bringing it up. And it is a part of the chapter in that, why I'm very much questioning, why is this a bad thing, right? And I have found that as much as people are scared of the word STD and teen pregnancy and so on, they're just as scared of the word pleasure.
Or like orgasm or something, right? Like we don't want to talk about,
And they don't even teach girls their anatomy, and what happens, and we've seen it, and almost every grown woman would tell you too, again, this sexuality baggage is, because pleasure is not a focus, it's like, girls are told, oh, it's going to be painful, or, oh, you just got to bear with it, get through it. We're told so many horrible narratives about this that we latch onto at a young age. And I mean, the truth is it is supposed to be a pleasurable experience. And again, boys are very much permissioned by the media to have that approach. So why do they get that and, girls don't? And it has a lot to do, again, with the girl just being really, truly comfortable with herself and knowing what her needs and wants are. And I think all of that just really messes people up because the history, has been to please a man lots of times. Like these societal narratives through history have been like that. And we are deconstructing those now.
When it comes to kids who are coming out, how have you dealt with it with people you've mentored whose parents aren't supportive? Like you're kind of in a different role when you're a tutor or when you're in a different kind of mentorship role with a girl. It's different from being a parent. There's a lot of thought about parental rights and about like you need to disclose that if my child came out to you or whatever. How have you navigated some of those tricky situations?
Yeah, interesting. I was definitely the first person to have a girl come out to a good amount of times before her parents.
Wow.
And I was more about supporting her exactly where she was at, not being like, you have to go tell your parents right now. You have to go do this. You have to, like, it is really important to meet a kid where they're at in their process and their journey. Because if you force it, then they'll just go right back into the closet, and shut it all down and then in shame and then live that way for way more unnecessary years. And so no, when I first started, by the way, when I start working with a family, I always said, if there's ever a dispute between you and your kid, I will always take her side.
Right out of the gate.
And yeah, right out of the gate. So they know, even when they're hiring me or bringing me into their kid's life. And they're always like, oh, there won't be any problems. And I'm like, yeah, there's always something that comes up. And I was like, and it's really important because they need to know I'm fully on their team or this is never going to work. Like they're never going to come to me. And you got to trust that I am going to be in spaces you're not invited into, but they will invite me into, and you want an adult there. You do not want their peer in that space. You want my words in those space. And so this rare space of trust that I've been invited to, thankfully parents have been so generous in giving me that space. And so, when I had girls come out, it was really hard, like definitely, couple where they felt like their parents wouldn't be supportive, and it was so traumatic for them to try to navigate that and find their authentic self. And the one girl I'm thinking in particular now is out of college, and her parents know, and she tries to live her most open life, but she still has wounds from that time because they didn't handle it well. And so she still just thinks, oh, they don't get me or know me. And I do think the parents have maybe tried to do better, but those initial reactions, your first reactions are going to set up a pattern and wounds for that kid. And that's why I talk about it. And they're just being like, oh my gosh, I love you, right away.
Mhm.
Not like, what one that comes up a lot is just like, oh, well, you're so young. How would you know? And it's like, it's
Yeah.
not true. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, the average age is looking around 14 now for
Yeah.
kids to come out. And that is when they hit puberty and have a better sense of their romantic interests, right?
Yeah.
But I find it just so frustrating because we'll look at like little girls, right? Like 7-year-olds, and we'll be
Oh,
like, do you
who's
have a
your
boyfriend?
boyfriend?
Yeah. And we're like, fine with that. Like,
Yeah.
heaven forbid she like
Yeah.
understands herself better at age 14, which
Yeah.
isn't a reasonable
Yeah.
age to be doing that.
Definitely a lot of
Um,
queer phobia happening there. And yeah.
yeah, and I get it. It's a different time. Like
Yeah.
parents' generation did not have kids coming out this early,
No.
but let's look at the harm that happened. Right? They came out. My generation, they very much came out in the 20s, but even older. I mean, it wasn't until their 40s after their first marriage, and
Yeah.
it was so hard and
Yeah.
traumatizing. Right? Like actually, the trauma, the suicide rate is so high for the LGBTQ plus
Exactly.
community.
Still, yeah.
And that's what we're up against. Everyone is, I don't know, they have all these other fears. The number one thing you should be scared of is suicide
Yeah.
for an LGBTQ plus kid.
Yeah. And when you say that you're on the kid's side, what I see in your book is that you want parents to join you there. You're not saying, stay
Right.
over in your parent box and I got it
Yeah,
over
yeah.
here. Because everybody can't have a Chelsey Goodan in their life, obviously. So you're trying to say, actually, you can do this too. You can be in your child's confidence. You can gain your
Definitely.
kid's love this way.
I'm trying to be a bridge, right?
Yeah.
Like a translator.
Yeah.
Like this is what they say. I'm going to translate it to you so that you can join me, right? I of course prefer a world where there were not sides.
Yeah. Well, okay, I said we'd come back to perfectionism. Let's do that right now. You say that perfectionism is one of the biggest problems that a lot of teen girls face. The statistics you give are pretty stunning here. 38% of teenage girls are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder right now, and that there's a huge leap in that number that happens between ages 12 and 13. How do you see perfectionism manifesting in girls? What kind of signs and clues do you get that parents could pick up on and be like, oh, perfectionism's a problem here?
Yeah, probably the two main places are in their academic achievement. Like they think that they have to get straight A's to have worth and value and to succeed in this world. And the pressure on them, whether they're getting the A's or not, they know that for a girl to succeed, she has to do well in school type of messaging. And it came from a well-intentioned place
Sure.
of like how we've been trying to empower girls to be just as smart as boys, go to
Yeah.
college just as much as boys. And we've done a better job at that. And now we're at this place where we're thinking that's the only route. Like she has to get straight A's and go to an amazing college to succeed in life. And they feel so much pressure. Oh my gosh, I could go on endlessly about them being up until 2 a.m. doing their homework and having nervous breakdowns about homework and getting a B on a test, right? Whereas what I see with boys, they really don't absorb it into their identity the same way. A girl is like, I am a failure, right? A boy's just like, oh, whatever, I'll do better next time. Like they learn from their mistakes. And that's all it is, right? It's a learning growth space. And then the other one would be through beauty and their looks and the pressures on body image. And that, everyone loves to blame social media and we could talk about it. But what I see actually starts way, way earlier. And if you think about how when we see a little girl, like a 5-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy, we say to the little girl, like, oh my goodness, what a pretty dress you're wearing. Look how cute you are. And we do it with good intentions. But we say to the boy, we're like, oh, what's your favorite subject in school? What sports are you playing? And we're teaching a girl from such a young age that her worth and value is tied to what she looks like. And the average age for a girl to start dieting is 8. So these things are happening really early. And what I always say too is what girls tell me is the women in their life are constantly degrading their own beauty and looks and body in front of them. First of all, commenting on a girl's body is never good. Like even if you're complimenting, the girls are like, stop commenting on my looks and body, right? Like they need that boundary for sure. But the next layer is women being like, oh, I look bad in this. Oh, I look fat in this. Oh, and then or perpetually dieting for, 2 decades of their life. Like what does that communicate? What does that model for a girl?
Oof. Let's come back to beauty and social media in a minute, but let's talk first about how to address this perfectionism. What are some suggestions you have about how we can start breaking that perfectionism down?
Yeah, so a lot of this, again, is about giving voice and creating a conversation and because every girl is going to be different, right? But, some things I've done, when I've said to a girl, like, what if you got a C on that paper? You know, what if you have nothing to prove to me? I already think you're amazing and brilliant. Like, what if you got a C? And she looks at me, like I said, the most radical thing. Like, I've had girls get emotional, and I just want to permission more space. And it's interesting. They don't usually actually even end up getting a C. But what happens by giving a lot more permissioning to that space, they just relax, right? It's that anxiety where they're not gripped to this idea. And then I constantly say to them, perfect doesn't exist, right? And so if they push back and they're like, oh, well, 100% on a test is perfection. I'm like, that's fleeting. It's transitory. It's only going to last a day.
Yeah.
You know, there's always another test. And then I talk to them about how I have seen people reach that perfect 10 in life seemingly, right? Like they won an Oscar, they're the CEO. They always have another goalpost. There's always something next to do. No one is like arrives and is like, I've made it and I'm done, right? But there's this total idea that you go from 0 to 10, you know, and we're just all striving for that 10 and then we'll be happy. We'll finally be happy once we're there in that perfect world. And it's just not the truth, right? And so the more I tell girls about it, I share my own story about it. I try to show up imperfectly so they model that for them and show them healthy, you know, tools. And so it has a lot to do also with self-compassion, self-acceptance, you know, teaching those types of things.
You also encourage them to avoid black and white thinking. And that's an important point because developmentally, kids are at a developmental stage where black and white thinking is probably more common. And, you know, it takes time and experience to get out of that. So what about with black and white thinking? How can we help kids avoid that?
Yeah. Well, it's that same idea of like that 0 to 10. Like I permission them to live in step 3, 4, and 5. Just live in those steps and that they have worth and value in that zone, in that gray zone. And because I think a lot of it has to do with like not feeling enough until they hit that 10. So what if we keep telling them you have nothing to prove? You know, you have worth already innately. And so that, and then also when I like to bring awareness to things and point out black and white thinking when they're just like, it's wrong or right or good or bad. You know, I'm like, what are some ideas in between? What could exist in between those two extremes, right? And I'll kind of call out like, that's pretty extreme thinking, you know, and I do it with levity and not judgment.
Yeah, laughter, you say, is an important tool.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Keep everything lighthearted, you know, put yourself into it too in a humble way. They respect that radical honesty around it.
Okay, let's get to social media. You mentioned this earlier, and a lot of parents and even lawmakers now are really worried about the impact of social media, especially on teenage girls. I mean, there are some studies that show that engagement on Instagram or TikTok can increase anxiety and depression for girls. And you acknowledge those kind of studies, but you're also not suggesting an outright ban on TikTok and Instagram and suggesting that this is just, a black and white issue, right? So talk a little bit about your view of social media.
Right. Well, again, I always say, of course, there are harmful things on social media, but it's not going anywhere. Like, I think it's a futile war to just get rid of it. I don't think that's going to happen. And also, what I've been in the trenches with the girls of looking at posts with them and actually understanding their perspective on it. And we are underestimating them in their ability to make healthy, responsible choices for themselves. And if we are just telling them to fear, and you are a victim to social media, then they will be a victim, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be what you tell them. And instead, I love to pull up posts and actually ask their thoughts on them and ask if they feel bad about their body by looking at that rather than making assumptions and projections onto them. Or I like to ask, does it feel healthy? How much you're using it? Like what would feel healthy of how much you're looking at it? You know, what do you get out of it? What do you like about it? Like I actually seek to understand first their relationship to it. And when they feel heard and respected in this dynamic, then they're like, oh, well, you know what? My parents respect me to make responsible choices. Like I could do this, I could do that. Like they want to be a part of the conversation. And what's happening instead is they, again, are just told what they can and can't do and controlled. And it's out of fear. The parent is really scared, right? They hear it all. And it's like, how do we, you know, there are things to support fear, but what's the next choice beyond fear, right? It has to do with listening, understanding, respect, trust. That's the space where you're going to feel more connected to your daughter.
Yeah, I loved your advice about just teaching media literacy. I mean, a lot of this coaching comes down to just asking them what they think about stuff and getting them to reflect on, how does this make you feel? Or like, hey, after you like doom scrolled for a while, sit in your body for a second and just ask yourself how that feels and let them be honest about what that feels like.
Yeah. and create an environment where it's safe to tell the truth.
Yeah.
That is so important, because they will, if they feel like you're going to jump on them, like you asked that good question you just asked, but if they feel like you're going to be like, see, it was bad, you did feel bad,
Yeah,
they're
okay,
going to
good.
not tell you
Glad
the truth,
you said that,
right?
yeah.
So instead, it's like, yeah,
Gotcha.
you asked that good question, and she's like, I didn't feel good. And you're like, oh, yeah, I get that. I felt that too. Just like live it with them, and be like, yeah, I struggled with that too.
Yeah, social media can be an opportunity to explore those values, explore how people feel, and to teach, like, I really like taking the opportunity to talk about media representation, about capitalism, about like whose interests is this serving,
Yes.
how an algorithm works. Because if they know that there's someone like pulling the strings behind the scene to make their feed look a certain way, and that they can kind of take some control over that, that's important.
Girls know how to control the algorithm.
Yeah.
Like, I always tell people that you can teach the algorithm what you want to see. And again, if we're just like telling her that she's going to look at skinny girls and feel bad about her body, and that's the narrative we keep telling her, that's going to be a reality of an experience for her. Whereas if I'm all like, no, like, look at these cool mental health infographics from these psychology accounts, or look at these, they love climate activism, social justice activism. They love all these accounts, and they learn so much. I learn from them. I mean, this generation loves psychology and mental health in a way that they're way more informed than previous generations. And it does have to do with access on social media, and to give them agency to seek out things that interest them. Like feminism, girls love finding different empowering women accounts. And no, it's great. And then also media literacy in terms of just watching a TV show with them. And really genuinely just enjoying it with them, no secret agenda. But you can create conversations that would be hard to bring up otherwise, and be like, hey, why do you think she likes him? Why do you think he likes her? And just get her thoughts on it. And that kind of helps you gauge too where she's at on these types of conversations.
Yeah. This again connects into beauty. You mentioned like going through a feed and saying, how do you feel like when you see this, et cetera. That reminds me of how you say when you first began working with teenage girls, you personally were kind of on sort of like an anti-beauty feminism kick. Like the rallying cry was that it's about inner beauty matters. And teen girls that you worked with actually broadened your perspective on this. You thought you had this empowering view that was sort of like, anti-makeup or whatever, or many different body sizes are great. Now, all that stuff's great, but you also learned that maybe you were kind of going about it the wrong way, or that you could be more nuanced about it.
Exactly. I was judging them also. I was judging their interest in makeup. I was judging, because, I did grow up under a wave of feminism that was like, I want to be taken seriously. I want to be considered smart, so I need to hide beauty. And in all fairness, that was my generation to a large extent. That is not fourth wave feminism. Fourth wave feminism is very much women can be pretty, they can be smart, they can be athletic. And that's the idea that Gen Z really wants to put out there. And I love it, right? Like, great, let's permission women to just be their authentic self. And some women do like makeup and beauty. It makes them feel good. Like, why am I judging them? I know girls who are really just truly into it. And it's not about everyone else the way that you like to think it is. And so, yes, they really helped me just understand how really what we're looking for is girls having all permission to explore their authenticity and what lights them up. Like, I don't like putting on makeup as much. I'm still like that. But doesn't mean that they've given me ideas and tips where I have like really glammed up, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. There's playfulness to it. Like, I like exploring who I am in this space. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And so why are we so judgmental?
Yeah. It seemed like you were able to get a great boost from teen girls by seeing their attitudes about those things.
Yeah, or just like seeing where they struggle too, and then realizing I've been struggling that way too. So a lot of times, actually, they helped heal me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I was struggling with that as a teenager, and I'm still struggling with it as an adult woman. Like, when does this healing start, right? And that was, big reaction to the book has been this acknowledgement of healing your inner teenage girl, because so many of these wounds started in the teenage years. And so me being like, oh my gosh, when do I finally choose to stop that narrative within myself, right? And what if we moved upstream and helped these girls at this age? We could change the trajectory for all women, right? Like habits of people pleasing and perfectionism and self-doubt, and body image. Like, so many of these things disempower women as they go into adulthood.
And before we go to people pleasing, I also want to say you do take time in the book as a white cisgender heterosexual woman to acknowledge privilege and to acknowledge ways that beauty standards are sometimes shot through with racism and other things. And also that social media can be a powerful tool for marginalized people. And so sometimes these critiques against social media as being completely unhealthy actually come from a place of privilege that don't recognize what a lifeline social media can be for queer kids or for people of color.
Yeah. The amount of LGBTQ kids that have told me that their life has been saved by social media because they are in communities where they don't feel safe to come out. They have no support within their community, and they found people to support them on social media. And I know that can feel scary in a world of like, oh, but they're strangers. But it's not like that. Honestly, it's them finding friends that see them for who they are and like them for who they are. And again, back to kind of the suicide rate, like that's why they tell me they feel like their life is saved by it. And then, yes, for people of color, they find there's more representation, right? They get to choose who they follow, so they can follow the fashion that they like or the types of women that they want to, that look like them, who they want to be, rather than, of still very white-centric media landscape that exists in more traditional media.
That's Chelsey Goodan, and we're talking about her book, Underestimated, The Wisdom and Power of Teenage Girls, which you might have seen featured in Oprah Daily and also on Oprah's book club page, where it's been recommended amongst other books. She also serves on the board of A Call to Men, which is a nonprofit that works against gender-based violence. So, Chelsey, you've got a lot of stuff going on. We mentioned people-pleasing. This is where I want to go next. This is related to perfectionism. It's one of the areas where you say girls really taught you a lot about yourself. So give some examples of people-pleasing in your own life that you started to recognize the more that you worked with teen girls.
Yeah, it has so much to do with being taught how to put other people's needs before my own. And girls are like, it's fine. When they say it's fine, it's because they're like making sure you're okay first and really kind of hiding their own pain and thinking no one can hold space for it anyway, right? It's those bad emotions that no one wants to sit in the discomfort with you. And people pleasing is also very performative. They're not connected to their authenticity because it's really a barometer measured by an external validation rather than, so here's a good example is 15-year-old Marley in the book, right? She was a star volleyball player, made varsity as a freshman, got so affirmed for it, right? And I noticed though she was getting migraines and stomach aches, and I asked her, I was like, do you like playing volleyball? And she looked at me like no one had ever asked her, right? And she was like, well, I like that I'm good at it, right? And I was like, yeah, okay. So back to that kind of achievement focus. And I was like, yeah, but do you like playing it? Does it bring you joy? And she was like, well, I like that I can bond with my mom about it. And I'm like, wait. Are you playing volleyball to please your mom, to please everyone around you? She looked at me wide-eyed, just like, oh no. Like she knew I was right. And, thankfully, well, then I asked her at that time, I was like, what does light you up? What does bring you joy? What pleases you? And she said drawing fashion sketches in her notebook on the bus rides. And I was like, cool, like there's this sewing class on the weekends. Would you want to do that? And she's like, oh my gosh, I'd love that, And so thankfully we brought her mom to the conversation. She ends up quitting volleyball. And it was just crazy, right? Because she was so good at it. But this whole idea of like girls get so affirmed for one thing and then they just go down that track instead of giving space to explore what lights them up. And she ended up being amazing in fashion design. And fashion is such a good example of a way we minimize and dismiss teenage girls' interests as superficial and silly. Like, oh, she's into fashion. Oh my gosh. By the way, there are plenty of fashion jobs in the fashion industry. I have plenty of girls now in their 20s who have those jobs, whereas being a professional volleyball player is actually way harder, right? And so it's funny how we don't listen, and be like, oh, wait, there's a way to support this interest in her. But,
and I also think like some kids might still play volleyball, but they can like take the foot off the gas a little bit or like reframe it. Like it doesn't have to be you have to stop or start. Like your book allows space for them to think about it and maybe either reframe their thinking about it or change their mind about it altogether, right?
Exactly. Every kid's going to be different. And it's really about letting them be the source of the answers of what's best for them. Oh, I should also mention that her migraines went away, her stomach aches went away. And it was because she was way more focused on what actually was authentic to her,
Yeah.
what brought her joy, rather than what made everyone else happy, which is a state of tension too. When people are really people pleasing, it kind of makes you uncomfortable. You're like, I don't know. What do you want from me?
Yeah.
And you see it in adulthood when women have like a dinner party, right? They make tons of dishes because they want everyone happy and they're so stressed out and they don't even enjoy the whole evening, right? What if a woman's just like, you know what? It makes me happy to only cook 3 dishes. And if people don't like it, that's their problem.
Yeah.
Like really understanding and checking in with yourself.
With the 3 dishes, some people, here's another one is, I'm sorry. They might say, I'm sorry, I only did this dish. Like the apologizing. I hear it so much, especially from women and girls. Like, I'm sorry there's like an epidemic of I'm sorries.
I know. I talk about it in the book. And those I'm sorries, again, are just trying to make sure everyone's okay. Everyone's needs are met. And like they like you, and account for anybody not liking you because you said I'm sorry. So then they're going to like you. And it's really uncomfortable. And so I often bring awareness to it when I'm working with a girl. I'm like, hey, when we say sorry, because I was doing it too, right? And so I invited her to call me out on it too. And we just bring awareness. Sometimes I've had a girl even do a tally within a given day, how many times she says it, just to be like, whoa, I said it 20 times today, right? And that awareness kind of wakes them up and jolts them into potentially new choices.
Yeah. And you're trying to get them to shift from external validation to internal validation. Maybe describe the difference there.
Well, so then that's really helping them connect to what their inner voice is. What is their true inner voice? And that is a mechanism, right? So often with people pleasing, we cut that off, where it's just asking them, well, what would make you happy here? What do you need? Then they can be like, oh, let me look within and actually answer that. And a lot of women and girls don't even know what their needs are, right? Because we're just so not used to even asking ourselves what would please us or what our needs are.
Yeah.
So take some time to develop that mechanism of looking within, understanding how your intuition is, creating spaces and environments to connect to that inner voice and wisdom. Some girls have told me it could be through journaling or through listening to music or going for a hike. I always like to ask the girl what works for her. And it kind of also is about the relationship to self-doubt, which is like the mean voice inside our head that's not our real voice. And really parceling out, like, what is that mean voice that's not you? And what's your true inner voice that makes you feel whole and happy? Yeah,
this was a big choice you made in the book. You didn't have a chapter called confidence. You called it self-doubt. Talk about that decision.
Yeah. Everyone's always like, confidence, confidence, confidence. Yeah. It's about girls, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, actually, the conversation is about unraveling their relationship to self-doubt and finding self-acceptance. And so much of it has to do with the voice, the mean voice we all have inside of our head. And, I've asked the girls, like, whose voice is it? Because, it's not your true voice. And the responses are so interesting. And the number one I usually get is society's voice is really loud for them and what they should look like, what they should do, how they should act. And it's back to that perfectionism and people pleasing and how many choices are being made off those shoulds. And then kind of beating themselves up over about not doing it perfectly or well enough, right? And you really have to bring awareness to that voice first and then actively try to make a different choice, which there's, a lot of different tools and lots of modalities of therapy to do that. But again, I'm always trying to source what works best for the girl.
And in your work as a tutor and mentor that you've done for over 16 years, you've really tuned into some of the biggest self-doubts that a lot of these girls are facing. And the 2 biggest ones that you identify in this chapter are that they won't be successful or that no one will love them for who they really are. Those are like the 2 biggies, right?
Yeah, everyone listening, right? Can't you relate?
Yeah.
Don't we all have fear around those 2 things? They're pretty part of the human experience, if you will. Certainly not being loved for who you really are. And that kind of comes back to the authenticity element of like, well, first you have to also be expressing who you really are in the world. And so many people are just scared of even doing that because they're so scared of judgment.
Yeah, and you're inviting people to let girls figure out who they are, to get them to reflect on what voices are in their head and like what their interests are. You invite us to ask girls, what do you care about? What do you actually enjoy doing? What do you want to do more of if you could wave a magic wand and do the thing you wanted to do?
And that's the thing that's going to build confidence, right?
Yeah.
Though I'm trying to give the actual working tools to build confidence rather than like, you should be more confident.
Yeah.
Like people just like, girl boss, like he's kind of just slapping it on them.
Yeah.
And what it is self-trust too, the ability to trust themselves and to trust yourself. you have to kind of look within and make a choice that is yours and have it go well, speak it out loud, have it go well, have it well received. And then that means, okay, I can develop smart thoughts. I can develop smart choices. And you kind of oftentimes need the parent to trust you first, your ability to do that so that you have space for that to grow.
How do you suggest people avoid the toxic positivity kind of approach to this? Because when we're addressing self-doubt, we might, like you said, be like, go girl, or like, girl boss. Like you're saying, we also want to teach girls how to sit with real discomfort or to learn how to fail or to avoid the toxic positivity. And it's funny because you're such a positive person yourself. Like you just like have this great energy with you, but you're also, I don't get the sense from the book that you have that sort of fake, like put a smile on everything approach.
No, yeah. So true. And I had to find that for myself too, right? I had to find my own dark space that I felt safe because that's what the full human experience is, actually. No one is just happy all the time. And so it's about feeling emotionally and psychologically safe in those harder spaces and feeling loved and whole in those spaces. And so where the positivity comes in, though, is affirming, not in like a girl boss way. In my whole compliments chapter, right, I get really specific on how we can affirm better. And I say increase specificity, which means instead of just being like, you're amazing, you say like, oh my gosh, I really see how you're juggling all your AP classes and you get home from school and then you go do your tennis practice and you take care of your little brother and make sure he gets food because your parents aren't home from work yet. And, I really like say to her, oh, you're really showing up as a good friend. I saw how you like made sure you went over to your friend's house to support her when she was going through that hard time. Like what a thoughtful thing for you to do, where she feels seen, right? And I bring a ton of positivity to that type of affirmation. And I say increase frequency and length in a way that you do 3 sentences, right? Try to send a girl a compliment in a text message with 3 sentences and it'll push you into that specificity more. And you get, not only with a girl, like with anyone in your life, they're going to like you more, right? Because people will like you as much as they like themselves through your eyes, like how they see themselves through your eyes. So the more you can be like, oh my goodness, you're so smart and insightful, and then describe how that showed up in their life, they're like, whoa, I do that. Give energy. What you give energy to grows. And so, it's not just a blatant positivity. It's a specific. And enthusiasm does help. Like I talk about enthusiasm and you have to find it for yourself. I am a naturally enthusiastic person, but they love enthusiasm. Like teenage girls are the queen of exclamation points and I love them for it.
This is the hardest needle, or one of the hardest needles for me to thread, is like not wanting a kid to get hooked on external validation, but also being validating and to kind of, that's a really hard needle to thread. Like,
well, I think it comes back to the specificity where they feel seen, where you're complimenting something they chose to do, something that was sourced from them, rather than you met my expectation of you. Like the barometer is not your assessment of it. You're seeing how she did that. She made a choice herself that was great and beautiful and responsible.
Okay, now I think a lot of people might be wondering about this next question, which is how to get girls to push through hard things, because there's also a risk of they let go of the rope too early. Like something gets hard. Like we want to build resilience too, right? So how can caregivers and teachers and parents work with kids on building that kind of resilience, but also respecting their autonomy and recognizing when they could make a choice? For example, a hypothetical kid who I will not name, who may be stopping piano lessons right now, much to my great disappointment, because I did the same thing when I was a kid and I eternally regret it. Go.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's hard because every kid is going to be really different. And I mean, I always say you got to just listen first and seek to understand what is going on for them. A lot of the resilience tools I'm saying are the things we're talking about: holding space for feelings, empowering them to make their own choice, giving them trust and respect, then affirming when they do make a good choice. Like all of those things, and not leading with judgment, leading with curiosity. Those are the toolbox of empowerment, really, is what it is too. So you have a kid who wants to quit piano lessons?
They're definitely going to. I'm so sad. Not forever. They're just done for now. They're going to switch over. They want to try guitar. They want to try drums. I just remember myself doing the same thing. And today I so much regret it. And I don't want to put my own regrets on my kids. So this is why I've just affirmed, like, I've just come to it like, okay, like this is your choice. But I also wonder maybe if I could ask them something like this, if I was to say, do you think it's worth working through a hard thing? When it gets hard or boring, do you think there's value in it? But I think
Yeah.
what your book would tell me is like, I have to ask from a place of real curiosity, not with an eye toward wanting the quote right answer from them. And that's what's hard for me to do, because I do want the right answer from them. But I also want to be able to ask that question honestly and try to get their honest opinion.
Yeah. Oh, you're working through it. It's good. You're asking all the right questions. I love how you're looking within. Also, I would say too, it's okay to be vulnerable yourself and say like, I just want to get real with you. Like, I'm feeling vulnerable because I realized I now as an adult regret quitting piano lessons.
Yeah.
So I have my whole story going on over here.
Yeah.
When I see you quitting, I'm projecting my story onto you that you're going to regret this, and that may not be your thing, but I just want you to know that's what's going on for me right now. And a lot of times the kids will be like, oh, okay, thanks for explaining that for me. You know,
Yeah.
they respect even the next layer of honesty with it all.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to continue. Maybe they'll come back to piano too. Like, I don't,
And I have compassion for parents too,
Yeah.
of course. This
It's
is
hard.
not easy. Yeah, there's going to be holding space for a lot of imperfection where no parent's going to get it all right either. And that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, we've talked a lot about authenticity throughout the interview. This part's really important to me, your chapter about friendship, because to be an authentic person, I think there's a lot of positivity and a lot of stuff online that talks about being authentic from a very individualistic perspective that maybe doesn't, to me, give enough attention to relational give and take. That to be in a marriage, for example, means that I'm going to give up some things that I otherwise would have wanted, or I'm going to be a different person than I might otherwise have been, or that I hope my partner can do that, and that it's an ongoing negotiation. And when we just think about authenticity separated from relationships, I think that can become really isolating. So your chapter on friendship might be a good place to explore that concern.
Yeah. Well, I do say, you're going to attract the right type of people, the right friends or the right partner by being your most authentic self, right? Like, I actually lean into being weird.
Yeah.
I use that word specifically because lots of times unique is a little achievement focused, and weird accesses insecurities in an interesting way to me, where it's like, oh, we don't, like, sometimes we're a little insecure about our full weirdness,
That's cool.
but actually that's where so much beauty is. And so that's why I always encourage parents to affirm anything that makes their kid weird, because they're usually like, oh, I feel really seen, right? And then you're bringing positivity to it. So I always say, when a kid is having a hard time finding friends or something, I'm like, just actually let your swan song, your bat signal, whatever term you want to use, shine, because then you'll start attracting the right people into your life. When we're trying to be normal, quote unquote normal, or like everyone else, or just trying to fit in, it's this manipulation of yourself that feels inauthentic and doesn't feel good. And truth is, you just end up like, maybe you fit in, but you don't really like those kids, and it doesn't feel that good. I mean, it can be hard when there's limited friendship access, in high school or in town. So I actually really tell kids adulthood is awesome in that way, where you can find your people. There's a lot more area to find your people, but to bring it about in relationship, right? So the first step to me actually is to still make sure when you do have autonomy and you're not in a relationship, to really let your full authenticity shine. So from the get-go, you're attracting a person who is into that, right? So there's not going to be as much difference and conflict. But then, yes, of course, everyone is different. And when you really, within a marriage and a relationship, you really respect how someone can see something differently than you, that is such a sign of respect and humility. And that's really important part of this dynamic, of course.
A lot of these friendships can get extremely intimate, can get so, like, kids can just give themselves over to their peers, right? Like, some of these strongest bonds can forge. What about parents and caregivers and others who are worried about codependency developing between their kids and other kids?
My goodness, you are just hitting all the smart questions.
I've got an 11-year-old, so I'm
Yeah, I mean, codependency is an issue, and it's something that we're finally shining a lot more light on. I did not grow up really knowing that term, and I thought I was like a real strong, independent, powerful woman, and I realized how codependency can show up in just me like putting other people's needs before my own, or like being like, I'm fine, I'm good over here, like I have it all handled, like let's deal with your issues, right? making it all about the other person. So it can show up in a lot of sneaky ways. And yeah, when a kid morphs their identity into another kid's, or another relationship, or with a parent, I see oftentimes, it's hard to unwind and unwrap that, right? So, I mean, honestly, how smart the kids are with psychology these days, I would teach them about codependency and what it looks like and how it shows up. So the kids, girls particularly, love to know how their brain works. They love being smart about psychology stuff. I've talked about trauma responses with them. I had a girl bring up her mother wound with me, right? Mother wound is not something I started knowing anything about until way later in life, right? And so they can handle these types of conversations of like understanding how that might show up. And again, it's without an agenda. It's like sometimes you can bring your own experience in, like, yeah, I was just learning about codependency and I realized how it showed up in my life growing up. And I was like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you see that happen with kids your age? It doesn't have to be about them and their issues. It can be just your curiosity about their thoughts on this topic too.
Again, you're just respecting the intelligence, interest, and emotions of teenage girls. Like, you're letting them be part of it. What did you learn about your own friendships from being closer to the friendships of teenage girls? Like, what have you gotten out of this?
Well, so yeah, and then there's this there's a couple different aspects to this chapter, but another one is just like the ride or die, beautiful feelings of like that, teenage girls like show up for their friends, right? And they let each other just be a mess around each other, right? And in a way that adults learn how to contain it all and put on a show. And we're kind of starving for really deep emotional connections, has been my experience. And we don't really get those unless we do like a girls' trip weekend away where all the walls finally come down after a day or two. And then we start sharing in a real way with what we're struggling with. Whereas teenage girls, man, they will sob in each other's
They can do that after
arms
school.
And like, they'll call each other and be like, oh my God, they'll tell every detail. And she wants to hear every detail. And like, so yeah, I mean, there might be a concern of codependency, but there's also this beautiful aspect of them being a mess together and that you like want to have friends who are willing to show up for you in that mess.
Yeah, I loved seeing you talk about becoming a better friend or like trying to be more of a friend, experience friendship as an adult, because I think it is something that in my own life and a lot of the adults that I talk to, a lot of my friends say we just don't have enough time. We aren't spending enough time finding room for our friends.
Yeah. And it's so important. They found that relationship. I mean, we put a lot of focus on family, but family is very much an obligatory love. I know that sounds like it has a judgment to it, but then a chosen love. Like you choose your friends, and there's great power to that. And the more you can actively choose the people in your life that really help you feel seen and understood and valued and cared for, the more you're just going to live in community. So it's not about an external validation of the friend. It's actually, I fully believe in living in community with people.
That's Chelsey Goodan talking about the book Underestimated, The Wisdom and Power of Teenage Girls. It's a terrific book, and I've learned so much from it, and it's a book that I'm going to keep going back to. All right, Chelsey, I imagine that some listeners right now might be thinking that all this advice sounds great, they're really interested in it, but they might think that things are already too far along with their kid. Maybe things are too broken for your book to make a difference at this point. Or maybe they feel like their kids have already grown out of the teen years, so they feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe that's not even relevant. My kids aren't teenagers, or their kids aren't teenagers yet, right? So I wondered what your advice is for people, especially for people who feel like it's too late for them, that they feel like there's already too much dysfunction in their relationship for this kind of stuff to work.
Wow. Thankfully, I really do have something specific that lands in my conclusion in the liberation chapter. And it is about making amends is what it is. And this, I did not expect to write about this. And all the girls told me over and over when I would ask them, what do you want most from your parents? And they would say, oh, I just wish they would say, I'm sorry.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, okay. What about? What do you mean? And I lean in. And these weren't just a flurry of sorries. These are serious amends. And, parents who want a restart is what I call it, like asking for a restart. Like, first of all, you should ask for a restart. You should say, hey, I just, read this book and I learned a lot and I just realized I want to create some healing between us. We just have a dynamic and a pattern that hasn't felt good. It feels contentious. You probably feel the same way. And I want to take the lead and ask you how we can make it better. So I'm going to ask, for a restart, and I might try doing things a little differently. And I want you to be able to trust it. And because I'm trying to do this, it may feel new. And I want to say, I'm so sorry that I haven't done this earlier. I'm sorry that, and it could be, really specific. It could be like, I didn't handle the divorce well. It could be like, I criticized you a lot growing up. Try to really find a specific thing to make amends, or ask the kid and say, hey, is there something like I can give an amends for that would make you feel safer around, emotionally safer around me? And, most of the girls, you can see in the back of the book, there are quotes saying how it's all they've
Yeah.
ever wanted from their
I
dad.
want to
It's
read. Can I read one?
really
I'll read one from
gut-wrenching.
Riley. I have it
Yeah.
right here. So Riley said, "My dad's never apologized to me for anything. It's actually all I want from him. I know we'll never work through everything, but an apology would heal those things that we may never talk through. If he were to apologize and recognize his role, I would feel so much better rather than feeling like I have to just forget in order to be able to move on."
Oh,
Yeah,
no, it's
I know.
heartbreaking, right? All of them, I did like, 7 in a row, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were gut-wrenching, right? And then I end, though, on a girl who her family did end up going all to therapy together. They learned how to apologize to each other, and she, used to hate her parents, right? And now she says she feels so much safer to tell the truth herself, right? Like, to be real with them and to say sorry herself because they have modeled this loving behavior for them. And so that's the best way to really start changing dynamics and patterns, is repair. Repair has been a talked about idea within the psychology realm lately.
And I think just trying it is really what matters. And this may be one of the hardest things for parents to do, but to really give your kids their autonomy in even being able to put a wall between you if that's what they need. Like, in other words, if you extend an apology and try a repair and it doesn't work, to also honor your child's decision and find a way to hold space, even if they're not going to enter your space anymore.
The priority is their well-being.
Yeah.
It's not you getting what you want or need, because a parent-child dynamic is unidirectional in that way, in that you have to be the adult in the room that holds more love, right? And they'll hear it, right? And they're on their own journey of accepting that. And there might have been a certain amount of harm done in their experience, and they need a beat. They need a beat to process and trust that you mean it.
Well, I mean, this is a terrific book. Like I said, I think it'll help parents and caregivers and teachers better connect individually with girls. It'll also, the wider it spreads, help change some societal perceptions and some of the social scripts that we have around teenage girls, who they are. So on an individual and social level, your book's doing a ton of work. And it made me wonder, though, I mean, it just came out, and I always end with this section of the show: regrets, challenges, and surprises. So the book being so new, I wonder if you have any regrets yet at this point, or if you've thought about the challenges, the hardest parts about writing it, or if anything surprised you in the course of creating the book. You can speak to one, two, or all three of those. It's up to you.
Yeah. I think I've been surprised how many people have loved it who don't have teenage daughters, and how much, women in their 20s or women with grown children have felt like it healed their inner teenage girl. And then, I haven't been surprised because, but men have really loved the book, dads have really loved it. And I think that's because I had a really great dad and I put a lot of healthy masculinity into it. It's not like, here we are about empowering girls, but it's not trying to say something bad about men and boys. I'm inviting them into this journey with us, right? Like you're such an amazing model of that. And I'm thankful for the men who step up and do that. In terms of regret is such a big word, but
It is.
a part of me is it's been hard because I could only write so much in the media chapter, right? And so everyone has their really specific social media questions, and they wanted to be so much more. I could have been, I guess, more thorough, but probably not, because I can only write so much in a chapter. But there's a part of me that's like, well, guys, that's not the whole conversation. There's more to this, And so there's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah. You mentioned the acknowledgement. I was so moved by your acknowledgments. You thank your dad in the acknowledgments. You thank your editor for saying they advocated for your voice. I see a lot of the things you're suggesting us do with teen girls. I see a lot of it coming through in your acknowledgments. Your best friend who was there for the celebrations, but also were there for your struggles. You talked to about your PR team who took someone like you that didn't have a platform at the time, but believed that your voice could be heard everywhere. And you also say there was some readers and a writers roundtable that really changed some big things about the book. What was the biggest thing that changed, do you think, from kind of the early stages?
Well, right. I had a ton of people read it, right? Whether it was at writers group or friends. I'm really into having people read so I can really gauge what's landing, what's not. I don't know if it's really specific, but I would say that having that humility as a writer to be open to feedback, and it's kind of actually a similar thing in the parent-child dynamic, right? Where it's not like I'm just the one in power, right? Like, no, it's in community where you listen and you're like, oh, I didn't see it that way. And understand that you can't see everything. It's impossible, right? I can't write a perfect book from moment one,
Yeah.
right? And so getting people's experiencing, better understanding, asking questions really helped me fine-tune the book to hopefully elevate it to its greatest purpose.
Yeah. And I just wanted to close with this one. The acknowledgement you close with: to your high school drama teacher, Jody Paproth, you say, "When I was a teenage girl, you were the non-parent adult who sought to understand me, always listened, never judged, helped me discover my quirky, authentic self, and let me be me. Thank you." That is a beautiful way to end it.
Yeah, that ends the acknowledgments I landed on her. And then when I was on my book tour in Colorado, I did my event in Colorado with her where she moderated it and stuff,
Oh,
which
cool.
was so special.
Yeah,
Special.
that rules. Well, Chelsey, thanks a lot. Again, the book is called Underestimated: The Wisdom and Power of Teenage Girls. It's a terrific book, and I loved this conversation, Chelsey. Thanks for joining us.
Me too. You are so good at this. You really care and really provide incredible questions to get to the next layer and the next layer. Thank you for that.
That's what I want the show to do, so thanks for saying that.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so great. Thank you so much, Blair.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Relationscapes. I want to give a special shout out right now to Keith Rex, Allison Squire, and Liz Red. These are some of the people who so often are sending me positive vibes on Instagram. Thank you, my friends. Thanks for that. Thanks for interacting with the posts. You can follow me on Instagram @_Relationscapes. I'm also on TikTok too. Check me out on TikTok @_Relationscapes. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you please rate and review it? It's really easy to do, and I'm not sure if my wife has done that yet, and I've brought this up before in other outros, and honey, have you reviewed it yet? If you haven't, it's free to do. It's not going to cost you anything. I'll help you do it. I'll show you where it's at on your phone. You just go to Apple Podcasts, you look up Relationscapes, scroll down to ratings and reviews, and there it is. You can put it in there. I love seeing new reviews come in. In fact, I saw a new one from LJ, a new one from them. LJ with a heart emoji in particular. I see you, LJ, heart emoji. Thanks for the 5 stars. You can also rate the show in Spotify. Mates of State provides our theme song. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, a journalist joining you from Salt Lake City, and I'll see you in another episode.